In the gray morning mist off Samar, a small American destroyer suddenly surged forward, charging straight at a powerful Japanese fleet. It knew it couldn't survive, but if it didn't attack, the entire U.S. force behind it would be wiped out.
On the morning of October 25, 1944, in the chaos of the battle off Samar, the escort carriers of Taffy 3 suddenly found themselves facing a nightmare: Japan's most powerful surface fleet, led by the massive battleship Yamato. While the American formation scrambled to escape, one ship turned toward the enemy instead of away.
In October 1944, the Pacific was on fire. As American forces pushed to retake the Philippines, the Japanese Imperial Navy launched a desperate counterattack, Operation Show 1. Its goal was simple and brutal: break through the U.S. lines, strike the landing forces at Leyte, and turn the tide of the Pacific War in one final gamble. To block the advance, the U.S. positioned several small task units around the islands. Among them was Taffy 3, a handful of escort carriers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts. These weren't frontline warships. They carried lighter guns, thinner armor, and crews who were never meant to face a battleship, let alone an entire fleet. But at dawn, on October 25th, a dark shape appeared on the northern horizon. Then another. And another. Lookouts aboard the American ships froze. Towering over the mist were the silhouettes of Japanese heavy cruisers, and behind them the impossible Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, its 18-inch guns capable of obliterating a destroyer with a single hit. Taffy 3 was trapped, outnumbered, outgunned, and outrun. And in the center of that formation was a 2,700-ton destroyer named USS Johnston. When the first Japanese shells crashed into the water around Taffy 3, Captain Ernest Evans didn't hesitate. Before most commanders had even processed what they were facing, Evans grabbed the intercom and issued an order that stunned his crew. "Full speed ahead! Make smoke! Prepare torpedoes!" USS Johnston lurched forward, engines roaring as it broke formation and sprinted toward the Japanese fleet, alone. The destroyer's thin armor rattled as massive 18-inch shells from Yamato screamed overhead, falling so close that columns of water drenched the deck like rain. But Evans stayed on course. He knew that if he didn't engage the Japanese immediately, the slow escort carriers behind him would be slaughtered. They needed time, minutes, maybe only seconds, to turn, launch planes, and try to escape. Closing the distance, Johnston weaved left and right, dodging salvos through pure instinct and violent maneuvering. The ship's 5-inch guns opened fire, shells streaking across the waves toward cruisers 10 times its size. Then came the moment Evans had prepared for. At just over 10,000 yards, suicidally close, he ordered, "Fire torpedoes!" 10 Mark 15 torpedoes roared into the water, streaking toward the Japanese line. One cruiser was forced to veer away sharply, losing its firing solution. Another took a hit and fell out of formation, smoke rising from its hull. In that brief, chaotic instant, a single American destroyer had just disrupted an entire Imperial battle line. But Johnston had paid the price. Enemy shells punched into her superstructure, tearing through radar, communications, and killing several crew members. Evans himself was wounded, shrapnel slashing across his face and uniform. Yet the ship kept charging, because for Ernest Evans, retreat was never an option.
The ocean around Taffy 3 had become a storm of steel. Shell splashes rose like skyscrapers, and every few seconds, a Japanese round found its mark. As Johnston pulled away from her torpedo run, she emerged from the smoke, damaged, bleeding, but still fighting. Evans wiped the blood from his eyes and gave another impossible order: "Turn back, re-engage the enemy." The crew stared for a moment, stunned. Their ship had already taken hits that would have ended most destroyers. Radar was gone. The forward guns were struggling, and the enemy line was still pushing forward with overwhelming firepower. But they obeyed. Johnston swung around and sped back toward the Japanese, placing herself between the cruisers and the slow escort carriers behind her. The ship's 5-inch guns roared again, firing so fast that barrels glowed red. Crewmen used their bare hands to haul ammunition, burning their palms as casing sizzled on the deck. Each American volley found a target. Japanese cruisers shuddered under the impact of the relentless fire. A destroyer charging ahead of the enemy line was hit repeatedly, flames climbing its superstructure as Johnston hammered it with pinpoint accuracy. But the punishment coming back was brutal. A shell ripped through Johnston's starboard side, shredding compartments and flooding the engine room. Another exploded near the bridge, showering Evans with splinters and knocking out more of the ship's communications. Smoke poured from the funnels. The deck was slick with seawater and fuel. Still, Evans pushed forward. At one point, Johnston closed to within just a few thousand yards of a Japanese cruiser, so close the enemy guns had trouble depressing their barrels low enough to hit her. The destroyer fired everything she had, punching holes into armor she was never designed to fight. Behind them, the escort carriers launched wave after wave of aircraft, pilots taking off with barely any ordnance, some armed with nothing more than pistols or depth charges. They were buying time, and Johnston was making that possible. Through the smoke and chaos, one truth became clear. The smallest ship in the fight had become the most dangerous obstacle the Japanese fleet had ever faced.
By late morning, the battle had pushed Johnston past the limits of any ship her size. She was slowing, her engines choking on seawater, her guns falling silent one by one. But the Japanese fleet was still coming, and Evans refused to let them break through. Another wave of shells landed nearby, one slamming into the destroyer's already crippled engine room. The lights flickered, then died. The ship shuddered as her speed dropped to barely 17 knots. Evans, bleeding, exhausted, and half-blinded from shrapnel, limped across the bridge. He could barely stand, but his voice still carried the same fire as the first charge. "We're not done! Keep firing!" The last operational 5-inch gun barked in defiance, sending shells crashing into a Japanese destroyer racing toward the carriers. The enemy answered with brutal precision. High explosive rounds tore into Johnston's stern, ripping away what little armor she had left. Splinters rained across the deck like metal hail. The ship was dying, but she refused to surrender. As Johnston drifted in the water, 3 Japanese destroyers moved in for the kill, guns blazing at point-blank range. The American crew fired back with whatever they had: rifles, machine guns, even signal pistols, anything that could slow the enemy for a few more seconds. One sailor later recalled, "You could feel the ship fighting with us. She didn't want to go under." A final shell smashed into the forward deck, silencing the last big gun. Flames licked across the superstructure. Thick, black smoke curled upward into the sky. Evans knew the end had come. He looked out over the burning wreckage of his ship, the ship he had promised would go in harm's way, and issued his last command: "Abandon ship." Some sailors saw him one final time, clinging to floating debris, drifting away as the waves and smoke swallowed him. He never reappeared. At 10:10 a.m., USS Johnston rolled to her side and slipped beneath the surface of the Philippine Sea. There was no triumph, no victory roar, only silence and the echo of a destroyer that refused to back down.
When the smoke finally cleared, the impossible had happened. The Japanese fleet, vastly stronger in every measure, began to withdraw. Not because they were defeated outright, but because the relentless defense of Taffy 3 convinced them they were facing a much larger American force. And at the center of that myth was a single destroyer that fought far beyond its size. Only 141 of Johnston's 327 crew survived the battle. Many drifted in the water for days, yet every one of them carried the same story, that their captain, Ernest Evans, had never asked them to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. For his courage, Evans was awarded the Medal of Honor, the first Native American in the U.S. Navy to receive it. But his greatest legacy was the standard he set, that bravery isn't measured in tons of steel, but in the will to stand when no one else will. In 2021, more than 6,000 meters beneath the Philippine Sea, explorers found the wreck of USS Johnston. Her hull was shattered, but still upright, still facing north, still pointing toward the fleet she charged that morning. After nearly 80 years in the dark, the destroyer that refused to retreat was still standing her ground. A small ship, a doomed mission, a legend that will never sink.